Okay, we ready to read the letter?
I'm nervous, but yes, let's go. My stomach's hurting.
Okay. Hi, Patrick. I watched the YouTube podcast episode you did with Morgan, and I felt intuitively that I would be seeing more from you. When I reached out to her for a book to borrow as I launched myself into guiding a newly out 19-year-old girl who was like a little sister to me, she mentioned you, and I asked if she would put us in touch. I am in need of all the advice. My foremost question is this: what did you need when you were newly out that you either did or didn't get? Do you want to stop and answer that?
Yes, because there's about 10 more questions after
There's
that.
a lot.
Well, yeah, in order to answer that question, I kind of have to. Well, I've never really talked about this on YouTube, but well, I was in the same situation as that teenage girl is. I think it goes on to say that she's having problems with her family and problems with the religion that she grew up in, and she's really having a crisis. So that was me when we were teenagers. We talked a little bit around that in episode 2 of the podcast, but I didn't come out and like specifically say like, here's what was going on. But yeah, I think the one thing that I needed that I didn't get is when I started to tell people, that I was different in this way. It immediately, I got a lot of reactions and responses that were either political or religious. And it was like all of a sudden, that's all that I was. And so I think that it is important for teenagers in this situation to have adults that don't think of it in political regards of like, oh, our family is conservative and, oh, you're going to become a liberal now, which I think now being gay isn't so divisive one way or another like it was 20 years ago. Oh my God, it's been 20 years since we were teenagers and I came out. And I think, religiously also, it's like, it just, I just think it's something separate, from politics and religion. And it's about that person and it's about them. It's not about what you think or how you see the world. All of a sudden it became everything. It became the way people saw me and the way I felt people were seeing me. And it was extremely uncomfortable. And it's like, I think it's really important for any gay teenager or gay person period to understand and realize that like, it's just a very small part. You still need to go to work. You still need to go to school. You still need to make your bed. You still need to wipe your ass when you shit, it is not defining. It does not define you. It is one small part of the very complex tapestry, patchwork quilt of who you are. And to reduce yourself or to allow somebody else to reduce you to just that one thing is just, it's just a disgrace.
Got a lump in my throat now. In this evangelical culture that we grew up in, I think it's common that everyone, in a sense, is reduced to their sexual orientation in some regard, because as women, we're told, that your worth comes from marriage, your worth comes from children, and marriage to a man specifically. So when you go against that, when you push against that status quo, it does feel like you're reduced to your sexual orientation being your entire identity. People forget all of the other wonderful things that make you who you are. When we were kids and you came out, you had so many other things in your life that were so important to who you were. At the time, music was such a big part of your life, maybe all of your life. Like that took up a lot of who you were, and to be reduced to just gay, like I can't imagine how painful that must have been at the time. I think it's great that you're you're talking about that and encouraging this person to examine this teenager that they're going to be hosting as more than just their sexuality, and really digging in and figuring out who they are as a person and what they want the rest of their life to look like, because this is such a small part. It's an important part of who they are, but it doesn't have to be their entire identity.
Now I have a lump in my throat also. And I answered the question of what I didn't get, but there was also one thing I did get, which is, I had one friend that I could talk to, you. And I think if that girl has one friend that she can just, I mean, we talked about me being gay and you being pregnant, and that was part of it, but we also just like went to Dairy Queen and got blizzards or listened to the Wicked soundtrack or like whatever, Uh, so I think if she has just one good friend, that's enough to counteract all the anything else she's getting, I think.
Just anybody, having anybody to speak life into. I hate using that term, it's so evangelical. Having anybody that is going to love you just as you are and just be with you in the moment, whether it's good or bad, easy or hard, having a partner to come alongside and just love you through it means a lot. And I think that she's going to get that in the house that she's going to be staying in. I really do.
And you don't mean partner as in romantic partner, but just someone to
No,
walk.
no. Just a friend. Just a friend. And I guess I use partner not because obviously not the romantic part of it, but there's a different level of friendship. And when I say partner, I think that's what I'm thinking of. I've got friends in my life that have seen me through the hard things, and I think it deserves a different name than friend sometimes, just because it can be very deep. It can be very, can't think of the words. It can be a very deep relationship, and it deserves a better name than friend. So partner is what happened. Do you want to move on to the next question in her letter?
Oh yeah, because I think we could just
Yeah.
I think we could just sit on that one for an
We
hour or
could.
so. Yeah, I think
We
I
could.
might cry before we're finished with this, Morgan.
Probably both gonna.
I hope I have the guts to actually publish this on YouTube. I'm not sure. We'll see.
Her next question is, how can she be there for this sweet girl? Which I feel like we already answered a lot of that with, just be there and see her as who she is and not just her sexuality. But do you have anything to add to that?
If your friend can help this teenager not get hijacked by any of the narratives. So, like, for example, maybe one day she'll come home and she'll be thinking about maybe all the stuff she heard from her parents about how it's not right to be gay. Okay, it was like, let's figure out, okay, is there a kernel of truth in that? If there's not, then let's just completely discard it. But like let's separate, like we were saying earlier, just because somebody says something doesn't mean it's true. Just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's true. So like, what is true for her? What's going to help her have a happy life? What's going to help her mature? All the things we've been talking about in this podcast. And maybe the next day it'll be the other side. Maybe she'll hear something absolutely wacky from some extremely liberal podcast or something telling her that she's supposed to be XYZ, that's maybe just as damaging to her as, some of the evangelical messages. So I think that, it's really, it can be really, you can just feel torn between two extreme camps, between and often feel like you don't belong in either one. So I think, if this woman can help this teenager just figure out what makes sense for her, what doesn't make sense for her, and help her be okay with discarding the messages that just don't fit her. Oh man, that would save her a lot of time and pain.
Yeah, you have to to take the good, take what's going to serve you, and discard the rest, and figure out how to be the best version of yourself.
Also, I would just say, I think to some extent, I got a little bit too much leniency because people were uncomfortable with me being gay. So sometimes I got a pass for bad behavior when I was 17, 18, 19. And I think that, your friend should hold her to account. Like, if she sasses off, don't put up with that. Don't think, oh, well, she's having a hard time, so I should. No, hold her to the same standard as you would anybody else. Don't make her respect you if she sasses. If she stays out past curfew. I mean, I know this woman is not her mom, but she's staying with her. So, if she stays out past curfew or she violates boundaries, ground her ass, treat her just like you would anybody else.
That makes sense. Okay, her next question. She and her parents are currently not speaking. I'm part of her chosen family. What does she need from me? And I think you just touched on that with the boundaries. I mean, if she's not currently speaking to her family, then, she's got to have some boundaries coming from somewhere.
Actually, in my late 20s, I was a counselor at a high school for a year, and there were a little group of gay teenagers that came to me. I mean, individually, but there was a nice little flock of them. And it was really difficult for me to not be too soft on them. So maybe I'm actually kind of giving that advice to myself retroactively. But this was true for me that year in that high school, and it might be true for her or almost anybody that's close to a teenager, that it really put me back into that place of being a teenager myself. And it really sort of opened up some hurts from that time in my life. And it was really difficult to sort of let that person be that person and let me be me, and be really clear on where they ended and I began. For example, sometimes those teenagers get really, really, really close to me, and they would say really, really personal stuff. And then they would really pull away, or maybe they wouldn't even come to see me for a couple of weeks. And I wanted to be like, hey, where are you? I wanted to come drag them, talk to me. I wanted to know what's going on, And so, holding her to account, but also giving her space. So how's that for a contradiction?
Yeah. It's, as a parent of a teenager, that's what you have to do. It's a constant balance. I want her to tell me everything, but also there are times where I don't need this right now. You're crossing my lines, or there are other times when tell me more, and she has shut down. So it's a constant give and take, respecting each other, not just her respecting me and not just me giving her space, but there has to be mutual respect there. Okay, her next set of questions has more to do with faith and God, your understanding of God. So the first question in this set: what led you to understand that God still loved you even if you pursued men? She says that her friend believes that she has to set God aside right now because he could not possibly want her if she's pursuing women.
Well, that's what everybody thinks, right? I mean, that's what the church is telling her. And that's what also the entire LGBT, or 98% of the LGBT community is telling her. But, I know plenty of priests that are openly gay. I know plenty of church musicians like myself who are openly gay. I know very, very fine spiritual writers who may not have openly said they were gay because they came a little bit before our generation, but it was very obvious, if you were tuned in at all. Henry Nouwen, for example, he was a Catholic writer and priest. And I don't know. I might get sued for slander if this video is viral, but I just can't believe that he wasn't gay. But yeah, I mean, of course she thinks that because that's what everybody's telling her. Even it's funny how that's the one thing that the most conservative people and the most liberal people will agree on. I mean, for different reasons, but yeah, of course, I fell prey to that as well. And, you know, I talked about on our episode that we did together a while back, I talked about how I felt like when I went to college, you know, I went to a very UNC Greensboro. It's a very like, they call it UNC gay, UNCG, UNC gay, because there's so many gay people there. And, but I felt like I had to set aside my entire community of origin. I felt like I had to set aside my friendship with you, you know, much less God. And I think that's a very false dichotomy. And I think it's very normal to be programmed that way. But when you kind of take the 5,000-foot view, it's also very shallow, like, and a little bit ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, I fell prey to that and I was miserable. I was miserable for 10 years of my life. But what was the actual question? That way I can wrap it up in a bow a little bit better than what I just did.
What led you to understand that God still loved you, even if you pursued men?
What led me to believe that? Yeah. So basically, just a shitload of pain. The way I was thinking about life and the way I was strategizing about life just wasn't working. And so, you know, eventually I became friends with a guy named Mickey that I also did a podcast with. And he is very Jesus centric and like, I love Jesus, sort of guy, but in a pretty non-judgmental way. And that relationship was really pivotal, having his acceptance. And I mean, obviously I knew you accepted me also, but it's like when you and I talk, we don't talk about like, oh, here's the problem we're going through. Let's find a relevant parable in the Bible that illustrates what we're going through. Like, we don't go there, but Mickey does. Yeah. And, yeah. Like, we just vent and bit to each other. Like, we don't actually try to get in a solution based on the Bible or anything. I notice I'm cussing more on this podcast more than I ever have.
They say that cussing reduces pain, so maybe that's your subconscious trying to reduce the painfulness of this conversation.
Also, what reduces pain is ice cream, so I might have to go get some ice cream after this.
Sounds good. We're out of ice cream. I need to go to the store. Yep.
But yes, I know that God loves me. I love God, and I don't know what God is. I think God is completely like, there's not a man in the moon called God. You know, there's not a person looking down on us. I mean, maybe there is. I could be completely wrong. But I think God is so big and so vast and so incomprehensible. Also, God made me. So now that all of my friends are having kids, like, I look at you with your girls, and even on the worst days, like where, you know, maybe they're sick or, you know, you're just totally exhausted, you still love them unconditionally. And so the idea, you made those kids, and so you love those kids unconditionally. God made us, so why would God not also have the same love for me, if not even more? It just got to the point where when I started seeing my friends with their kids, that was another huge thing that helped me realize that the idea that God wouldn't love me is just ridiculous. It just does not hold any water at all.
So even though my issues or my set of circumstances were different than yours, I always had a hard time believing that God loved me. Because we were brought up in I feel like it was a very punitive kind of religion that we were taught. So it was hard to believe that God could love any of us. I don't look at, you know, one sin as worse than any other. So for me personally, being gay is no different than telling lies. If you're a habitual liar, you're on the same scale, I guess, they weigh out to be the same. At least that's what we were taught. But then when it came down to it, people wanted to talk more about gender issues or sexuality issues. Those were the big ticket items that got focused on in church, in camp, in youth group. But that punitive upbringing, it made it hard to believe that God could possibly love me. And it wasn't until I was older that I really was able to see the love that is God. There's a few books that have helped me with that. From the Jesus end of things, Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. It just talks about the character of Jesus, the heart of Jesus. That helped me realize and view Jesus differently, view God differently. Not as someone who wants to punish me and someone who hates me for everything that I've done wrong, but like a parent, someone who loves you and just wants what's best for you. I think at the end of the day, I have to view God that way, as a parent who just wants what's best for me. And yeah, maybe there's rules that go with that. But like you said, God made you the way He did. So I don't know that that's something that He could hold against you. I know that's an unpopular way to look at it in the world that I live in right now, but that's just how I feel.
So going back to when you said like, oh, being gay is like lying, like a sin is a sin is a sin. So, okay, if I were 18 or 20 or even 30, like I probably would have just shut you down right there, and I probably would have gotten angry, and I wouldn't have given you time to say the rest of what you said, which, like, put in context to the whole, there was really nothing offensive about it whatsoever. Like, you were explaining how we were taught.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I believe that, because I don't.
And I would have missed the part where you were talking about something bigger. You were talking about how you were struggling with whether or not God loved you. And so I would have completely missed an opportunity to like connect with you on a very important part of your life story, because I would have gotten angry because you didn't say one thing exactly as I thought it should be said. Just because you're a gay teenager, or really anyone who hasn't like really kind of figured it out or spent a lot of years sort of dealing with all of the noise outside of you, that especially like if you come from a culture like this girl is coming from, I assume, like it can really tear you apart, and it can make you so sensitive to the least little slight that you completely lose fellowship with people. And then you get super lonely and you just miss out on all sorts of things. People think you're a jackass when you're not. So I think, even now at age 35, hearing that, there was a little twinge in my chest.
Yeah, I had a twinge saying it because it's not. It was what we were taught, but it's not something that I've ever been able to believe. Like, they can tell me that all day long, but it doesn't click for me. So saying it feels super weird.
But actually, a family member of mine did say that earlier this year to me, and it really hurt my feelings. But he was actually saying it to interrupt someone who was about to say something much worse. And like, I also realized that like he was actually showing acceptance, and he was trying to protect me. He was trying to help me. And he said the exact same thing that you said, that a sin is a sin. And it hurt to hear, but it also was less hurtful than what would have been said otherwise.
Yes.
And also, I know that like, based on his life and where he comes from, that's actually like, that's huge for him to have said that. So I just wanted to verbalize all of that because I don't know exactly what my point is. Maybe you can make it clear what my point is. But I think it's important. It was important for me to just say that out loud. Maybe you can make it make sense now.
Speaking to the person who wrote this letter to you, I guess the way to make that make sense for her would be to understand where this girl is coming from, with those messages being thrown at her constantly. There will be moments of tension. There will be moments where she might shut down and she might not want to be receptive to anything having to do with religion. I have moments like that. She may withdraw from religion entirely for a season, and that's okay. If that's her path, then you need to let her take it. But be there with an open mind if she does decide she's ready to come around and talk about those things. Be gracious, be loving, Yeah, I think that's the takeaway from that is just to come into those conversations not with low expectations, but um knowing that if she needs a break, let her have a break. Let her pull back, let her retreat, let her sit in her feelings for a little bit and process everything because this is a lot.
Yeah, and even though your friend is like literally inviting her into her home and giving her a place to stay, there might be times where that teenager uh, feels extremely offended by something she says,
Absolutely.
um, because of how torn apart she by all these messages around her. So that might actually be a moment that they have to work through together.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So the second part of that last question, um, what was the bridge that led you to keep pursuing God as well as your love life?
I think in many ways my friendship with Mickey that I mentioned earlier and coming across that idea from Patrick Carnes that like God can be loving, um, being working in churches where being gay was absolutely a non-issue. It's such a complicated question that I don't really know how to answer it, to be honest.
It sounded like the people that you were around that accepted you as you were kind of gave you the courage maybe to pursue God as you were, because they accepted you and they loved God. So then it made it feel like you could also do that.
Yeah, that's right. And that brings me to another thought, which is, maybe in my early to mid 20s, I was probably mostly around gay people. Um, for example, my professors in college some of them were in 20, 30, 40-year relationships. So, it's not like they weren't living their life in a way that was compatible with what I wanted to do. But for me, I think the real bridge was like being around straight married men that were, 30 to 40, 50 years old when I was in my mid 20s that really just did not see me differently. And in many ways, it kind of felt like the guys that I grew up with, the guys that we grew up with, they were probably a little bit more traditional, straight laced, talked about God and having that male companionship from like straight married guys that were having babies and families and having normal lives. I think that probably did it more than anything else. I don't know why, but that's what helped for me.
So maybe camaraderie is the key, like just having somebody to be with you. Like we were talking earlier about friends and having good friends and partners in all of the junk that life throws at us. Maybe the secret there is just being seen. Just being seen by someone and accepted as you are.
And being seen by the type of people that probably earlier in my life would have rejected me. You in this letter is giving me free therapy.
Nice. Glad we could help. Okay. The last thing that she has to say, she says she has an excellent book called Unclobber by Colby Martin that she plans to either read with this girl or have her read. He goes into the reasons that he believes the church has tragically misinterpreted passages like 1 Corinthians 6:9 and 1 Timothy 1:10. She's wondering if you have any other books you recommend on the subject of reconciling the anti-gay scriptures with the notion of a loving God. She says, I'm ultimately wondering why a gay person who was reared on the idea that God condemns gay people to hell could find it in their hearts to keep on loving God and move through all of that to a place of peace and rest. Ultimately, why do you love God?
It's going back to that idea of like, not everything you read or hear or see is true. Figure out what's relevant to you, take what you like and leave the rest. So for me, this question is like, it probably was helpful for me in my early 20s to like read some books on that topic or listen to podcasts on that topic just to hear that, okay, there are people that believe the opposite or believe differently than what I heard. But at this point, it's like this thing called life is so much bigger than being gay and is so much bigger than anything that can be put in the Bible or the Quran or anything. If my dad ever hears this, he'll probably shoot me himself for saying the Bible and the Quran in the same sentence.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
it's just so much bigger than one sentence in Timothy or Corinthians or whatever she said. And it's just, for me, it's just not a question worth answering, of like, how do I reconcile these 2 or 3 sentences with like who I fundamentally am and who my soul is and who God made me to be. It's like,
Yeah.
again, it's just ridiculous. And it also took me like 20 years to get to this place. Okay. So like there are probably dots along the way that I'm not connecting, but that's just where I am today.
There's just a lot to unpack with different translations and figuring out what's what. I think for me personally, dealing with homosexuality in the Bible, trying to reconcile the two, I look at Jesus and what Jesus had to say, and what I found that Jesus had to say about homosexuality was nothing. And if someone else has something, I would love to hear it. And I'd love to dissect that, but I've not found it. But a lot of times we get stuck on these scriptures and they become idols. They become the things that take up all of our time, all of our attention. We spend so much time worrying about things like this when there's so much more in the Bible that is inclusive and loving and not condemning.
And it's funny, actually, that the evangelical movement proselytizes that, we can have a personal relationship with God, that he's a personal savior. And yet you're supposed to follow what the Bible says legally, rather than listening to your heart and what God puts in your heart. So we have fully and completely not answered that question. Let's go on to the next one.
I don't know if we can. I'm ultimately wondering why a gay person who was reared on the idea that God condemns gays to hell could find it in their heart to keep on loving God and move through all of that to a place of peace and rest. Ultimately, why do you love God? How did you get here?
Well, the place of peace and rest thing, I think that was when my friend passed away. She was in her 70s. She was like basically like a second mother to me, the work mentor, just really wonderful, special lady. And I literally experienced reality differently in the first few days after her death, first few weeks. Like I could feel her in the trees. I could feel gravity differently. I could feel my body differently. I mean, it was like a completely different altered reality. And that was one of the first moments that I really realized that there's so much more going on here in this thing we call life than what meets the eye. Mm-hmm. And I was tuned into it in a deeper way due to just that immense loss. And also the way she set it up. I mean, she told me, she was like, she didn't tell me she was dying. She didn't really tell anybody because she's a Christian Scientist. So it went against her core belief. Like they don't talk about sickness because they believe it makes the sickness worse. And, but she told me, I hope to speak to you in phase 2, for lack of a better term. And she was basically saying, like, I'm going to talk to you once I'm quote unquote dead. So that was a big part of me coming to peace with life in general, coming to peace with death in general. I mean, some of the conversations we had in the weeks and months leading up to her death, I mean, talking with a dying person that is pretty special. It was a pretty singular experience, and especially when you don't know they're dying. Mm-hmm. And it was also a time in my life where I was asking some of the big questions about life that I think your friend is sort of hitting on. I mean, it's all in the context of being gay, but I think everybody struggles with the idea of like, can I really love God? Does God really love me? Am I really lovable? But yeah, I was asking these big questions, and she didn't have answers, but she helped me see just how big life is and just how much love there is in the world. And she was also raised Southern Baptist, like I was before I went to our Christian church. So I think that helped also. And she was just talking about some of the different things she went through. And, it was like, okay, this is how I feel when I'm around her. This is how I felt growing up in that other way. So it's like, which one works? Well, it's totally obvious that how I feel with her and people like her is just so much more fulfilling and rewarding. And the other way is all about you know, like the rapture coming tomorrow and God blowing up the world or whatever, and
Which
it's
isn't
like,
even in the Bible, by the way. There's no
well,
rapture.
I don't know enough to agree or disagree with you on that, but it's like, where's the joy in focusing on that? It's like, my dad would often say in my childhood, like, oh, God's going to come back any day to take us away from this, this life on earth, as in, like, no, life is life. Like, it is meant to be enjoyed and to be like lived, not to
Yeah.
just wait for some other place that we're supposed to be going to. No, it's like, it's now. Heaven is now.
Yeah, that's always struck me really weird when people say that because, like, well, what are you doing now? Like, how are you making the world a better place now? How are you impacting people's lives now when all you're focused on is what's going to come when you die? And you're just kind of trucking along till you croak instead of actually trying to make a difference.
So what was her actual question? And I'll see whether or not I answered it.
Um, Ultimately, why do you love God?
Ultimately, why do I love God? Because I've tried just about every other way and it wasn't as fulfilling as this way. I mean, I love God because I am God and God is me and God is you. And I have just a little tiny part of God in me. And so how can I love myself if I don't love God? What do we mean by the word God? I don't know, but it's the biggest possible questions that we could ever ask or think about. And I would much rather relax into that and like be held by that than to anchor myself in politics or religion or alcohol or whatever. I mean, it's just such a deep and abiding, wide.
My interpretation of her question, maybe it's less of why do you love God, but
How?
how, maybe like separating God from the people who claim to love God or claim to be godly people. That's been a difficult thing for me personally. And I wonder if maybe that is part of her question as well.
Well, that's a little bit easier to answer, I think, for me personally. I mean, it took me a while to get here, but it's like anything that's confusing is not God. Often the things that I'm scared to do, that's God. That's me loving God. That's how I love God, is doing the things that I don't want to do, that I'm scared of doing, and doing it anyway. Being patient with people is how I love God, because I would really just rather tear people a new one with some Southern sass, most days of the week. How I love God is, staying later than I need to at work, to have a conversation with someone because they're happy to see me. It's, helping my neighbors move. It's not having a big career, and it's not getting swallowed up by all the crazy shit that people say. And it's not living in resentment because I can't control that other people don't agree with who I fundamentally am. That's not my business. So it's understanding that, like, there are a lot of things in life that I have to accept. And I think most of the things in life that I have to accept, I was about to say they're not of God, but actually maybe they are of God, but they're there to teach me the life lessons that I'm supposed to learn. But I think loving God is very uncomfortable and it's very difficult, and it's much easier to just love myself or do something that feels good or be in my ego. It's much harder to really be in fellowship with myself and other people and with God. But how I love God is I do whatever is difficult, and that's generally the path to God for me.
That was the end of her questions. She says, if you find yourself with some time to jot down some thoughts for me, I'd be so grateful. Thank you so much, Patrick. So thanks for answering those questions for her. I know it's going to be helpful.
Oh, I feel exhausted. How should we finish this talk today, Morgan?
This is deep. I thought these were going to be fun questions, man.
Yeah. It was interesting that, like, I think one final thing. You had answers to those questions yourself. It wasn't about you being gay, but it's like, okay, there are many parts of the human experience that are specific, but there are also many that are universal. So it's
Yeah.
like we were talking about our shared difficulties around some of these topics, but in very different ways. So I think it's very important for anyone, a gay teenager or anyone, to remember that, like, you know, suffering is part of life, and that the human experience has a lot of commonalities if we look for it, if we can see it, if we can find it.
Yeah. I feel like we all have parts of ourselves that we are afraid to show certain people in our lives. We all have, like, there were things that I stumbled over because I don't really want to share that with everybody because I don't want the criticism that's going to come from it, or the, we'll pray for your soul, even though I mean, that's my journey.
We'll put
Um,
you on the prayer list.
yeah, I think I'm
I
already
told
on.
my mom on my freshman year of college, I said, I don't want you and daddy put me on the prayer list anymore. That's just gossip. I do not want to be put on the prayer list. She just said,
Yeah.
okay. Anyway, I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. But yeah, and yeah, I think churches do use prayer lists as a way to gossip sometimes. I think the church we grew up in, I think they've gotten better about that, truly. Um, I don't go there anymore, but I think they've probably improved on that. But what I was trying to say, we all have things that we are afraid to show other people about ourselves, and things that maybe we are uncomfortable with about ourselves. Maybe that's why it's hard to show it to everybody else, is because um, it feels like who we are is wrong for whatever reason, whether it's because of our religion, how we were raised in religion, cultural differences. Everybody's got something. So it's easy to find that commonality if you just try. Like that's all you have to do is just try, and you can find common ground with anyone.
Is there anything I left out about my experience that you could share with this woman and her teenager? Because you probably have a better take on whatever it is that I did in my life than I do, because I'm so close to it.
So I think a lot of the things that we went through, a lot of the things that you specifically went through, some of it I feel like was just normal teenage stuff. The tension between teenagers and their parents. There's a podcast that I listen to. I know you listen to it too. My and Bialik's Breakdown.
Yeah.
And I was listening yesterday when I was outside pulling weeds. I had my earbuds in and was listening. And she was talking about this hormone, or not hormone, what's the word? A pheromone that is emitted from the mother, which I know this person wouldn't have this in this case, probably. But there's a pheromone emitted from the mother when the kid is becoming a teenager, or getting ready to fly the coop, between 16 and 18 usually, that causes the kid to be repelled, um, so that that natural separation happens. And that just blows my mind that our bodies can work that way. Um, but I think that's just a normal part of life. That goes to show us that, hey, it's designed this way for a reason, so that this kid gets out on their own and figures out their stuff, separate from the house they were raised in, separate from the people that they grew up with. Um, so the fact that this teenager is trying to find her wings and find herself, I think that is wonderful for her. And I wish her all the best.
Yeah, I wish her all the best also. And, we did all right. You've been with your man for a long time. I've been in a happy relationship for mostly happy relationship.
They're all mostly happy, right? You can't be
Yeah,
happy all
yeah,
the
they're almost, if it's only mostly happy, that's as good as it gets. Okay.
time.
Yeah, but we've been together more than 5 years, and we both have dogs, and we both have good lives. So I think if we can do it, pretty much everybody else can as well.
Yeah, we survived. I don't know that we've made it per se, but we've done okay. And I think she'll be okay too.
Well, Morgan, thank you so much for doing this with me today. Oh, it's always good to talk to you, and this has been such a meaningful conversation. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Love you, girl.
Love you.